Why don't we put that back up, please, 1247. Again, this is the CAPS 5. You didn't administer this until you already had Dr. Curry's scores, did you?
That's not correct.
No, you administered it after Dr. Curry made a disclosure, correct?
That's not correct.
You administered it after Dr. Curry had administered hers.
I learned that in late February when she submitted her report, but I had no way of knowing that in December 2021.
And you didn't make any reference to this in your disclosures until after Dr. Curry made reference to hers, right?
I don't recall the date of the final disclosure or the fourth disclosure.
All right. Can we go to the next page? Let's go to the top of the page. We'll blow that up. Instructions start with standard administration and scoring of the CAPS 5 are essential for producing reliable and valid scores and diagnostic decisions. See that language?
I do.
Okay. You don't contain it standard not to fill out the frequency.
I think if you're filling it on the right side of the box, I think that's perfectly fine.
All right. So you think it's standard administration to simply leave blanks that are already in the form?
I didn't leave blanks when I needed to find out the frequency of the symptoms.
All right, let's go down a little bit further. Let's go to administration. It says, number 2, read prompts verbatim, one at a time, and in the order presented, and then has a variety of exceptions. With respect to the childhood trauma notations you made in the margin of the CAPS 5, you didn't read the prompts verbatim, did you?
I read the first prompt. If there was a yes, then I would have made a decision, do I need to administer another CAPS?
Right. And you ultimately didn't do that. You just simply wrote the margin on the last one.
Because she wasn't endorsing those symptoms.
Okay. You talked about endorsement of symptoms. Ultimately, what you're looking for with respect to PTSD is functional deficiencies. It's one of the things you look for, right?
Well, with any DSM diagnosis, you're looking for what are the functional impairments as a result of the symptoms that the individual is experiencing.
Okay. So, in fact, if you go all the way to the end of the form, one of the things that we deal with is impairment in occupational function, right?
Correct.
Okay. What's Ms. Hughes' occupation?
She's an actor.
Right. And she had just wrapped a major motion picture, correct?
That's correct.
So you didn't determine that she had an impairment in occupational function. She's still performing at literally the highest level of her profession, correct?
She had a number of PTSD symptoms while she was filming Aquaman 2.
Right.
That interfered with her ability to really organize a lot of resources for herself in order to go forward and film that.
I asked you whether she was performing at the highest level of her profession. Yes or no?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that.
Okay. But did she report to you that she loves to cook?
She loves to cook, yes.
Yeah. Hike?
I don't recall hiking, but...
Read?
Yep.
Spend time with friends?
If she can, that has been significantly diminished as a result of her PTSD symptoms as a result of this case.
She just had a baby.
She did.
Exercises every day.
The most that I can tell, she does.
Completed level 3 sommelier training.
She did.
All right, she did all of these things, and you've made a determination that she is impaired with respect to her occupational functioning.
I made a determination that the symptoms interfere with her functioning. She does these things, but it's not like the symptoms aren't there. She has to continue to work even though she has a panic attack, even though she has an intrusive recollection of the trauma, even though she's having heart palpitations and sweaty palms when something comes into her mind. It does not stop her from doing what she needs to do, but it does interfere.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about another test that you administered. And that was called the PAI. You know that one?
Yes, I do.
That's the personality assessment inventory.
That's correct.
Why don't we put in front of the witness the PX 1244?
All right.
Dr. Hughes, do you recognize PX 1244?
Yes.
It's a list of critical item endorsements,
Correct.
and that's derived from the PAI.
Correct.
And this is the PAI that you gave 9/26/2019.
I don't have the cover sheet in front of me, so.
Why don't we scroll down to the bottom, Tom?
Yeah.
There it is down there.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay. Now, critical item. I'm going to move this document, PX 1244, into evidence. And I'm going to ask her about this piece.
Well, it's his exhibit. Do you have any objection to his exhibit, which is just the first page? All right, 1244 evidence.
Okay. So, critical item endorsement. This starts a total of 27 PAI items reflecting serious pathology have very low endorsement rates in normal samples. These items have been termed critical items. And you're familiar with that concept?
Yes, I am.
All right. And I just want to ask you about a couple of the critical items. The first one is potential for aggression. This was deemed under your PAI a critical item. It says, sometimes my temper explodes and I completely lose control. How did that potential for aggression bear on your analysis?
Well, number one, certainly it reported to me that in her relationship that would happen. Her anger and her affect regulation would become impaired. Number two, you have to look at the total scales where that scale is not, so it would not be a major cause of clinical concern. Number three, she had 4 responses that she could say to this question. Mainly true, very true, mainly true, sometimes true or false. She chose sometimes true. So she's answering honestly about her experience.
So it's sometimes true that sometimes my temper explodes. That's
Correct.
what you testified.
Correct.
All right. So you've talked a little bit about this concept called malingering. And there's one here for potential malingering. And this is another one of these critical item endorsements. Critical items means that these are serious pathology, right?
Well, as you can see, it says endorsement of these critical items is not in and of itself diagnostic. So you need to review the content of the item, and that's how you make the determination. Is this something of clinical concern that you need to do more understanding about?
Okay, so this critical item endorsement, this one reads, under potential malingering, I think I have 3 or 4 completely different personalities inside of me.
Correct.
And she endorsed that as sometimes true.
Correct.
Okay.
And there's not one elevated malingering scale on the PA.
How many personalities
Let me
does
ask
she
you about
have? She
another
admits to
document.
this, and this wasn't problematic for the doctor. Someone says they have all these personalities, and this isn't problematic. This doesn't trigger another test. That's crazy.
We'll mark the document as PX 448.
$12.48. All right, yes, sir.
So my question is, what is the procedure once a patient admits to having all these personalities inside? What is the next step for a clinician to do?
Just for the witness.
Just ignore it? Just make notes in the margins?
Dr. Hughes, do you recognize this?
Yes.
All right. And these are critical items that were deduced on the TSI-2 critical items list.
Correct.
And what's a 0 mean?
Means that she scored a 0 on that item. She said it's not something that's relevant for her at the time frame that the test was administered.
And these are all self-reports, right?
Correct.
And so she scored a 0 on doing something violent because you were so upset.
Correct.
See that language? You knew Ms. Heard to do violent things when she's upset.
This test specifies how often have you had these symptoms in the last 6 months.
Just in the last 6 months.
Correct.
So she hadn't had them in the last 6 months.
Correct.
This test also asks and inquires about intentionally hurting yourself or cutting.
In the last 6 months is the prompt.
In the last 6 months.
Correct.
Had Ms. Heard previously indicated to you that she cut herself?
She indicated one time as a teenager in a reckless moment she did. It was stupid and I never did it again.
And those are her words? That sounds so scripted.
So that was the first time you met her. She indicated that she had cut herself. What did you do to satisfy yourself that you didn't continue to engage in that behavior?
As with most things, I asked about the frequency of the behavior and had it ever occurred again. Had she ever engaged in suicidal behavior or suicidal gestures? That's part of that screen.
Where did Ms. Heard cut herself?
I'd have to look at my notes to be sure.
You don't remember?
All right.
But
Why
you
don't we
remember
do
exactly
that?
what she
That's
said.
in your intake note, correct?
I don't recall.
You don't recall.
Let me go to PX 938.
But you remember her saying that it was stupid and she was a teenager at the time, and you don't recall where she cut herself. That's strange.
And if you put it up for the witness. That's not it. Let's go to the next page. There we go. All right. PX 938, we're on the third page. This background information sheet has already been admitted into evidence. And there's a discussion here we talked about earlier about intimate relationships.
I'm sorry, the question?
Yeah, let's go back to the first page. All right, there. This is in at 1246. So this page anyway, I'll ask that it be published to the jury. Right, we're going to do it again.
So 1246.
1246.
All right. Okay, it's in evidence. There's supposed to be redactions, though. But okay, all right. That's in 1246.
All right. So why don't we blow up the intimate relationships section? There's intimate relationships here relative to a variety of people, including a person called Tasha.
Tasha.
Who's she?
She was Miss Heard's wife.
Okay. And that relationship preceded her relationship with Mr. Depp?
That's correct.
Did you say on direct that you saw no previous inter-partner violence? Just yes or no?
I don't believe I did.
You don't believe that you saw inter-partner violence, or you didn't say it on direct?
I don't believe I said that yesterday.
Okay. Your Honor, can we approach?
All right, yes, sir.
Okay, so we're doing a sidebar. So that's when the attorneys meet in confidence, the microphones are down. So they're meeting to go over evidence or testimony that they do not want the jury or the public to be aware of, but mostly the jury. So they're probably discussing the notes about Tasha, or what was indicated in the note taking about Tasha, Amber Heard's previous wife, previous spouse. So if there was interpersonal relationship violence in that relationship, then plaintiff's counsel could lay the foundation and begin to question that, as that's a red herring. That's a history of abuse. So how does that factor into your findings in the assessment of Amber? That's where I believe he's going. But this witness is something else. She has obviously not done, her note taking is not robust and comprehensive, and she deliberately left out certain things. And then she made it seem like Dr. Curry's analysis and assessment wasn't thorough. But in fact, it shows that hers was not, because she did not even indicate the amount of abuse that was reported from month to month to month to month, which is unusual, especially in a test that measures frequency and intensity. Why wouldn't she indicate how many times in the line abuse occurs? Why would she just leave it in the margins as if it's insignificant? So that shows me that her note taking was not comprehensive. She let a lot of information out, probably to try and railroad Johnny Depp, to not show a balance in the note taking, to show Amber Heard as the aggressor. So she conveniently left out a lot of information. It sounds like, again, we do not get to see these notes, but it sounds like she left a lot of information out so that her testimony could be as biased and leaning in favor of Amber as possible. But as you can see, plaintiff is just ripping her note taking apart because it's not comprehensive, yet she has drawn such a strong conclusion as to Johnny Depp being the perpetrator and Amber the victim. Okay, they're back on. The mics are back on.
Could you speak with Ms. Heard around the circumstances that gave rise to the TRO?
With on May 21st?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did Ms. Heard ever tell you that James Franco spent the night with her at the ECB between May 21 and May 27?
I recall, again, it would be helpful to have my notes so I can tell you exactly what, but I do recall that she did see him at some point. I do not know if he spent the night.
Do you know if Elon Musk spent the night during that period?
I don't know.
That would be something to remember, especially if she indicated that there's no intimate relationship between James Franco. Why wouldn't she recall that chain of events, whether or not he was spending the night? Again, she had so much details about the abuse, the alleged abuse, the details, and then totally scripted, but can't remember these factors, which are important factors.
You cannot testify that Johnny Depp was not abused, can you?
I can testify that he had physical acts of violence perpetrated on him as well as psychological aggressive acts perpetrated upon him.
But you don't call it abuse.
No further questions.
All right, redirect.
Oof. Let's see how they recover from this. Let's see how they recover.
Dr. Hughes, you were asked about some presentations. I think plaintiff's 1241 was the first one. If we can bring that up. Tom? 1241?
Let's see if she calls her Dr.
Yes,
Curry again.
And if you can scroll down, what was the significance of this presentation? And can you give her control of the document? It's just one page? Oh, it's not the entire presentation. Okay. Can you please tell the jury what you provided in this presentation?
To the best of my recollection, it was what I spoke to you about before of how people who are not trained in forensic psychology but who are working with victims of domestic violence can go into court and navigate with the court system and present and talk about domestic violence in a legal setting.
Thank you. And that's been moved into admission. That's been moved in, correct? Okay, well, let's go to the one that I don't think was 1242, please. Tom, if you could bring that up.
So they're trying to lay the
All right, and is that just
foundation
one page?
that she's an expert
How many
in
pages is
providing information about testimony
Okay.
about victims of domestic violence.
Do you recall this presentation, Dr. Hughes?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Could you please just, I'm going to move the admission of plaintiff's exhibit 1242 first of all. Any objection? All right, 1242. Okay. And could we publish it to the jury, please?
So they're trying to make her seem more credible than she's coming off.
And Dr. Hughes, could you please explain to the jury what this presentation entailed?
So I was asked by the head of the Kings County Bar Association to give a presentation about intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and how psychological experts can be of assistance. This was just because of how Brooklyn is a bar association that was attended by many of the prosecutors from the Kings County District Attorney's Office, as well as defense attorneys. And as I stated before, this presentation was about how to really understand cases of domestic violence, how to understand what if she drops the restraining order, what if she doesn't call the police, what are the myths and misconceptions about intimate partner violence. And when she uses force, what does that mean? How do we understand that? How do we evaluate for that? So again, without seeing the rest of the presentation, I believe that was the thrust of this presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, you testified about the notes you took and the notes you reviewed, and you were asked about some limited questions on testing. I'm going to ask for Defendant's Exhibit 1434.
So defense is saying
No.
because she's been commissioned to go before judges and prosecutors and lawyers in Kings County, that makes her an expert because she can present this sort of information
I didn't mean to take it away from you.
about domestic violence,
Thank you,
about
Michelle.
intimate violence.
Dr. Hughes, is this your CV?
Therefore,
Yes,
she's
it
an
is.
All right, I'm
expert.
going to move the admission of Defendant's 1434.
That she's credible because she's went before this audience.
You're out of completeness.
So
I've got all the
defense
other
is
records
doing.
in here for Dr. Hughes.
That
I'm
doesn't
trying
mean
to
anything.
see
You know the right
completeness.
people, you could go before any audience.
Okay. Let's go to Defendant's 1435, please. Now, Dr. Hughes, you've testified about the different testings that you administered, and this is one of the ones that I believe you testified to earlier, correct?
That's correct.
And this is the DSM-5?
This is the clinician-administered PTSD scale for the DSM-5.
Okay. I'm going to move the admission of 1435. Any objection?
So those are her notes based on the DSM.
It's not the CAPS one, it's the DSM-5.
PTSD test.
But she administered all these tests, Your Honor, and for completeness of record, they can't put in partials and then not have the rest of it.
Well, there was no objection to when they put theirs in. Now they're objecting to you putting.
I would say rule of completeness, Your Honor, Rule 2, Virginia Rule 2:106, that they can't just put a partial in and then not have the completeness of the testing in the documents.
So they put their test in, now you want to put more tests in, correct?
Correct.
But that's not a completeness argument then. That's just a different test.
Well,
But what's the objection, though, that there's... Okay, all right, I'll sustain the objection. Thanks.
all right, well, then we'll go for the other ones. You did the TSI. Before we go on to the others, let's talk about, could you please tell the jury what you administered in this DSM-5 and why this is significant?
Sustain.
Can you tell us why the DSM-5 is significant that you administered?
So the DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders. It's published by the American Psychiatric Association. That's where it has all the criteria and all the information for our major mental disorders like major depressive disorder or panic disorder or PTSD. What the CAPS is, the clinician-administered PTSD scale, is it follows all of that criteria that's in the DSM-5 so that you can make a very accurate diagnosis.
And what, if any, diagnosis did you make as a result of this DSM-5?
So not only on this, I mean, this instrument can stand alone where she meets PTSD criteria just by virtue of this instrument, pardon me, but also the other testing that I gave where she had elevated scales on PTSD measures which correspond with the DSM-5 symptoms of PTSD. So there are multiple measures that are consistent across time that she meets criteria for PTSD.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes.
Now,
Now, you were also given one page of the scoring on the TSI 2 and one page with respect to the PAI. Do you recall seeing that?
It wasn't the scoring, they were the critical items on those respective tests.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask to bring up Defendant's Exhibit 1858. Which is the full PAI. And was this the actual testing and scoring?
Yes, this is the profile, the scores that are generated from the 344 questions that Ms. Hurd answered on this test.
And what were the results? What did you determine based on the testing of this PAI?
Well, that the results were valid and reportable. There was no evidence of exaggeration or malingering on this test, and there were significant symptoms that correspond with traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder symptomatology.
And I believe you said again that there was no elevated scores. Can you explain to the jury what you meant by that?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
So elevated scores are a way that we get to know where a cutoff is to say that something is clinically significant. And that follows very standard statistical principles. So when a scale is elevated, it means that we have sort of greater confidence that this individual endorsed a lot of different symptoms that make this scale relevant, and then we want to figure out why that person is having an elevated score on something like depression or anxiety. It gives us greater confidence that, this person's maybe reporting depressive symptoms like people who are depressed.
And what would constitute an elevated score?
Well, on different tests, it's different things. Certainly on the PAI, it doesn't follow linear T-scores. It's a little different statistically, so you have to look at it differently. But certainly, it's usually about a T-score of a 65. And on some it's a T-score of a 70, which is a T-score is a normative curve, is a way of allowing us to compare people's scores, comparing your scores to the normative group of scores.
And would it be at all helpful to have the entire test as opposed to a one piece of paper or one page?
Well, certainly you cannot tell the entirety of how the symptoms that Ms. Hurd endorsed in the scales were elevated just by the critical items.
All right, I'm going to move the admission of Defendant's Exhibit 1858.
Objection hearsay.
And this is the completeness, Your Honor.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Let's bring up 1859. And this is, you were shown one page from the TSI-2, the Trauma Symptom Inventory 2. Do you recall that?
Correct.
Okay. What is the significance of the TSI-2 exam, the full exam?
The Trauma Symptom Inventory is a test of common symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and related traumatic symptomatology. And on this score, she had, elevations in intrusive experiences, which is the intrusive component of PTSD, where thoughts or memories or feelings come into your mind when you don't want them, with accompanying distress. And then the defensive avoidance, doing many, many different things to push it down, to try not to think about it, to try not to talk about it, so that you don't get upset. And she also scored high on a scale of relational avoidance, having difficulty feeling close in relationships, not only intimate relationships, but friendships as well. And that's a related trauma symptom that individuals have after having sustained an interpersonal trauma like domestic violence.
And would it be helpful to have the full exam as opposed to one page of it?
As with anything, seeing an entire profile gives one more information.
Your Honor, I move the admission of Defendant's Exhibit 15 for 1859.
Objection hearsay.
And I would argue the completeness of the again. And then if I could draw your attention, this is a text message from Mr. Depp to Erin Filati. We talked about her on 10/31/2015. And it says, this is the second time he's held off giving me my meds by blackmailing me into seeing him. The first time I had just chopped my finger off. Do you recall seeing that as part of the documents that you reviewed?
I believe I did.
Of course you do.
We can take that down. Now, you were also asked to listen to an audio tape, and it's plaintiff's 343. I'm going to, and do you recall listening to that audio tape at some point as part of your review?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'm going to now pull up that same audio tape from the same day, and I believe it's June 2016. And if we could go to, we're going to have a few different, so we're going to start with 2 minutes, seconds, 00, going to 2 minutes, 40 seconds, and 21.
Because that's a fucking irrational and violent fucking maneuver. So a man would want to get out of that area so that he doesn't get so fucking angry that he actually does crop the fucking wife.
Now that was just before the punching, hitting that was played. Do you recall that?
Objection leading.
Well, the tape recording that you listened to was at 2:46:01 to 2:47:20, and that was 2:40 through 2:40:21. Correct?
I understand.
Objection leading.
Okay. Now let's go to after.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you. Now let's go to after that, 2:52:00 to 2:52:34.
It's been since Australia, and I've been all over with you. I haven't been working out, but nothing. Jesus.
And then let's go to 3:20:00 to 3:21:37. And while they're getting that, I'll just ask you the question, Dr. Hughes, do you recall that Mr. Depp said that they had fights in the places that he listed on that audio tape?
Objection leading.
Sustained. All right. What do you recall Mr. Depp saying about fights that they'd had on that audio tape?
Objection no foundation.
She just listened to it.
Never even met with Johnny.
I think it was hard to hear in this one. I had listened to it previously, just acknowledging that there were fights previously.
Thank you.
But no mention of who precipitated the fights or who instigated the fights. She just knows there were fights previously. And she never met with Johnny one-on-one. So. Audio was really low.
That might mean fucking A to this will make it. I've tried. We've got to get our shit together. I will recognize when other thoughts start making sideways. I will recognize.
Do you recall listening to that part of the tape, the audio tape?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recall from that portion? Again, I know it's hard to hear, but
It's hard to hear, but what I recall from hearing that was the negotiation that the couple is trying to do and trying to say, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do better.
is it possible to turn that up anymore, or is it, I have one more? I'm just
Negotiation sounds like Johnny doing all of the negotiating.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, my last one is 3:26:20 to 3:29:50.
Your Honor, can we approach?
Okay, yes, sir.
All right, another sidebar about these audio recordings, which are really difficult to hear. If you know or you can hear it clearer, let me know in the comment section what you think he's saying. All I hear is Johnny saying, "I'm sorry," but I don't hear Amber very much. So let me know.
Anyway,
Okay, they're back.
what are we going to do different in the moment when you're mad and you go fuck it? You decide all bets are off.
What I demonstrated, what I accomplished. I put the fuckery away. I told myself I don't want to pay. No, it's going. No, it's fucking going away. If I list the things that I feel that fuck you over or make you feel shitty or anything like that, I fucking remember. I try to bring it down notches. Maybe notches. Try to say,
I need to know what we need to do different. I need to know. What do we do different if I have a problem? You need to tell me how to tell you different if I'm hurting you. You need to let me be able to be mad. Sometimes you're going to make me mad. I'm a human. I cannot live where it's like...
It's the same thing with me, then. You're going to have to let me get mad.
Yes, exactly. I just
get mad and then you start fucking yelling.
I don't have to start yelling. I think I start yelling once it gets fucking heightened. I'm gotten a lot better about that. It's just I only start yelling when it's fucking hour 11 and we're really in it. I'm starting about the yelling.
Physical life.
You witnessed it. You're the one that brought it up. Australia was fucking great. Just arguing. Let's go back there. Let's go back there. Hands on our hearts. Let's go back there. Oh no, when you're
Is the monster gone? Did you put him away? It's been so, when you get on that train and you get angry, you stay on it for so long and you won't come down, you won't talk to the person that is you.
That's not always. That's not always.
It doesn't have to always be a monster, but what is it? Can we put that away? Can you remember the bigger picture? You don't want to spend your life. I've asked you this so many times in fights. You want to spend your time on it. No, you don't. But I ask you because this is something you're choosing. I'm saying to you, olive branch. And you don't take my olive branches. You made me feel humiliated for offering them. You asked me to stay in Australia. I stayed, and then you walk out on me all the time. You've got to take some olive branches from me. You've got to offer them too. You've got to be bigger than what you feel at that moment. And so do I. So do I. But if I call you on it, will you hear it? You'll call me out on it if I'm doing it.
Do you remember listening to that, Dr. Hughes?
Yes, I do.
And what is your interpretation of that? What do you recall?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
She's an expert.
I think this is more of how this couple is trying to negotiate in the face of all of the turmoil and the violence and the abuse. I think it's important pointing out is my recollection is that there's two Australias. They're talking about the honeymoon Australia, not the Australia where the incident happens. They go back, and that becomes a honeymoon time for them. And I think certainly hearing how this couple has talked about the monster and the person who comes out, as we talked about that cycle of violence where the person who, hurts her and hits her and controls her isn't the same person that she loves and she cares about and that she wants to be with.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes. Now, you also were asked about Dr. Jacobs and treatment and treatments. And did you review the treatment notes, Jacobs? I'm going to you to bring up defense 1059. And recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
This looks like the first of Dr. Bonnie's treatment notes in October 17th, 2011.
Okay. And do you recall whether Ms. Heard was already with Mr. Depp at that time?
Yes, she was.
Okay. And you testified quite extensively yesterday about Bonnie Jacobs' notes and entries there. Were those reflected in these notes?
These were the notes that
I can ask it differently. And what, if any, of those citations that you gave to the jury were in these notes?
Objection, compound.
Overruled.
These were the notes that I was referring to yesterday.
And what was the significance of these notes to you? You were asked again about them on cross.
I found the treatment notes very significant because they had contemporaneous reports of what Ms. Heard was going through, not only what she was reporting in her relationship with Mr. Depp, but her accompanying symptomatology. What the notes revealed was there's a significant amount. Where we see it unfold in time, we see where the violence starts, and we see how it unfolds. We see at least 3 indications of sexual assaults. We see constant pleadings and upset about his substance abuse and trying to find ways to get him help. And she joins Al-Anon to get herself help as a family member of someone who struggles with substance abuse. We see how she's reporting a lot of controlling behavior and obsessive behavior. We see that there's 2 instances where the police were going to be called in her apartment in Orange. Because of the fighting at that time, once they actually were called and once they weren't, from what I can amass from the notes. So what it does is it really shows how this relationship is unfolding over time and actually getting worse.
And then you indicated that Amber Heard moved from Bonnie Jacobs to Dr. Cohen, and that was in 2014. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what is your understanding of the relationship between Dr. Cohen and Dr. Kipper?
They were professional colleagues and they were friends. And it's understanding why Ms. Heard left the relationship with Bonnie Jacobs. It became a tumultuous relationship for her there because she was doing a lot to protect Johnny, and Bonnie Jacobs had concerns.
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection.
No foundation.
I established the foundation. She reviewed the notes, and she interviewed Bonnie Jacobs.
Overrule the foundation objection.
Go ahead.
Objection, non-responsive.
overall non-responsive. Please continue, Dr. Hughes.
The reason that Ms. Heard left her treatment with Bonnie Jacobs were one, that Mr. Depp continued to denigrate that relationship or therapeutic relationship. But number two, really more importantly, is that she wanted to protect Mr. Depp because she didn't want Dr. Jacobs had some concerns about perhaps his substance using in front of his children and that she would be a mandated reporter. So Ms. Heard did not want to do anything and talk more about what was going on with about Mr. Depp with her therapist for fear that something might happen. So she left that treatment really to protect Mr. Depp.
I'd like to move the admission of Defendant's Exhibit 1059 with the treatment notes.
Objection to hearsay, Your Honor. This is what we've got with this one.
Your Honor, I think that for completeness here, she's relied upon these and they reflect the present sense impressions. I'll sustain the objection to hearsay. All right. Let's go to Defendant's Exhibit 1057, please. And Dr. Hughes, you also indicated that you relied on the treatment notes of Dr. Conan, correct?
Connell Cohen, yes.
Okay, and you also interviewed him as well?
Correct.
Okay, and what was the significance of what he reported to you that related to your opinions?
Well, this was a continuation of her treatment, and the treatment here where it seemed like Dr. Connell Cohen was going was a harm reduction model, really trying to help Amber stay safe in the relationship by not talking back, by leaving, by not engaging. And those are very sort of short-term strategies when you're in a relationship mired with interpersonal violence. What we also see is what I mentioned yesterday is her psychological status and functioning continues to deteriorate. She continues to have more anxiety, more affect dysregulation, so the feelings are coming up and down all the time. She's having more sleep problems. She's going on more medication. And the sort of the conceptualization and understanding of that is, sort of exposure to repeated trauma causes psychological disequilibrium and destabilization. And we're sort of, again, seeing the trauma unfold over time. And also in these notes, certainly there are those contemporaneous reports that correspond to specific incidents, like I was speaking with you yesterday about the Boston plane incident. There are actual notes where she called him after
Objection, Your
she
Honor.
called
Yes.
him.
What's the objection?
Beyond the scope of the question.
All right, I think I'll sustain the objection. Next question. Okay. What, if any, additional information did you get from Dr. Cohen that assisted you in your opinions?
Well, certainly from the notes, as I was stating, that, there were times where right after an incident, Ms. Heard wrote, she contacted Dr. Cohen either by text or by email and saying, Johnny did a number on me tonight. I really need to see you. I'm safe. I'm
Objection to hearsay.
Was 1057.
Hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustain the objection.
Strike the hearsay as well.
Thank you. You were asked about a knife. You were shown Plan 92, a knife that I think killed death. What understanding of the significance of that knife and that phrase as it related to Amber Heard?
Objection, Your Honor. No fiction.
He showed it in cross-examination. I'm able to ask about it, what her understanding was. He cut her off when she was trying to talk. I'm just letting her go back.
Her understanding of a knife.
Well, let's pull up Place 92. Tom, can I get you to do that, please? I believe in response to the questions asked by counsel for Mr. Depp, you said it depends upon what the context is. What did you mean by that?
Well, First, I believe that this is the knife that has a turquoise end. And this was a time when Mr. Depp was filming The Lone Ranger, and he was in a turquoise phase. And she purchased him that because she thought it would be a kind gift. The phraseology is that Mr. Depp told her the only way out of this relationship is death.
Objection, hearsay.
I don't understand the objection. I think she was entitled to be able to speak to that. But it's Mr. Depp's statement. Party opponent admission. The objection. Thank you. Okay. And what is your opinion? What do you think of that as a clinical psychologist in specializing in IPV and trauma?
I mean,
Objection, Your Honor. Can we approach?
Sure.
I see defense stumbling because all the forensic psychologists can rely on hearsay statements, which are inadmissible for the proof of the matter they try to assert. So it's not admissible testimony. He can just object, because she really has no credible statements. Okay, let's see.
Dr. Hughes, do you think that the phraseology on the knife bears any relationship or significance to the opinions you've had in this case?
Objection, Your Honor. Leading.
Sustain the objection. What, if any, significance does the phraseology on the knife have to the opinions you have provided in this case?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of the disclosure.
He brought it up in cross. Thank you.
So there are several things. I certainly am aware that at this time that Ms. Heard purchased this knife for Mr. Depp. She was engaged in her whole lot of denial and minimization about the extent of the violence in the relationship. There is a notation in Dr. Bonnie Jacobs' notes about when Mr. Depp uttered this to that was funny. Miss Heard was taking it like, oh, maybe it's endearing, maybe this is okay, but it was definitely a clinical cause of concern at the time that phraseology was used.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes. Now, you listened to an audio tape, and then we showed some additional ones from that. What, if any, photos did you review as part of your examination?
Objection, beyond the scope of cross.
I was asking all the different authority. I'm just establishing that she also looked at photos. Sustain the objection. Okay, let's be honest. Dr. Hughes, based on everything in the cross-examination and the redirect, what, if any, changes do you have to any of the opinions that you provided to this jury yesterday?
Objection, compound.
I don't have any changes to my opinions that I gave yesterday.
And do you still hold those within a reasonable degree of psychological probability or certainty?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right. Is this witness subject to recall?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Ma'am, you can't discuss your testimony with anybody, but you're free to stay in the courtroom since you base your expert testimony, okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So we saw defense.
All right. I think we'll go ahead. Yes, sir.
Break for
Okay.
lunch. So they're about to break for lunch. So we see defense attorney trying to establish credibility again for this witness because she obviously went rogue and was unable to answer questions as to her assessment, the assessments that she used for PTSD based on the DSM-5. And so they are trying to establish the foundation she is a credible witness and that her opinion, her professional opinion, has weight. And that's why they brought up the presentation that she did before judges and lawyers and prosecutors in the Kings County court, explaining to them the dynamics of interpersonal or domestic violence cases. Whether or not that has weight, I don't necessarily think so, because just because the bar association calls you in to speak doesn't mean necessarily that you are a pioneer in the industry. It could also mean you know the right people and that you're well connected and they bring you in to speak. We all know nepotism exists in all areas, in all fields. So I don't necessarily think that's something for defense to hang their hat on because she did a presentation before the Kings County District Attorney. Furthermore, in the beginning, as it relates to her testimony from yesterday, if you listen to the testimony from yesterday, it was heavily weighed in favor of Amber. I think the judge is just going to break for lunch.
Okay, let's go ahead and take our lunch break now. Just don't do any outside research and don't talk to anybody about the case, okay? We'll see you back here too, okay?
Okay, so court is down for the morning. So again, as I was saying, based on her testimony from yesterday, her testimony was extremely unprofessional and biased in favor of Amber. There was very little objectivity, if any. There was very little objectivity, if any, and it was pretty much, she did not give credence to the
This before we look at some of the prior testimony that happened. She testified, Dawn Hughes, that
she did not give credence to the fact that men can be victims of domestic violence as well as women. She didn't even present percentages of how frequent it occurs. It was just Amber was the victim, just like all women are the victims in interpersonal relationships. So anyone with eyes could see that that testimony seemed scripted, heavily biased, lacking objectivity. She didn't even use clinical terms, which I was surprised about. It sounded like two ladies in Brooklyn gossiping about a woman who is being beaten by her husband. It did not have any foundational evidence, objectivity based on the test. It was like a girlfriend going off about her boyfriend or husband beating her. It was so heavily influenced by her personal views on domestic violence. And then today, she said, oh, no, yes, I gave credence to the possibility that men could be victims of domestic violence, which she didn't. She didn't even mention it. Her pronouns were she and her. She's a victim. Her. He's the perpetrator. He's the aggressive one. He is the one who instigates. He, and Amber was the victim. But if you listen to the audio tapes, time and time again, you hear audio from Amber pleading with Johnny not to leave, stop walking out. Yeah, she pleads with him to stop drinking, stop using drugs, but she's never pleading, please don't hit me, please don't hit me. She's saying, you're lucky I hit you with just my open hand and not a fist, but you could take it. And I wish the plaintiffs harped on that more in terms of the audio and saying, like, what does this present? Does this present Amber being the victim in the situation? Also in terms of the minor abuse. So Amber's behavior are minor infractions. But Johnny's behavior, because he's a man, this is how her testimony comes off. It's more violent and more aggressive. But Amber's infractions are just minor or in response to his behavior. So those are the takeaways. It's extremely biased witness. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'm going to break for now, and I will see you next time.